All right, folks, welcome to Chapter 10 of Organizational Behavior, our lovely textbook by Griffin and Phillips today. Chapter 10 is Managing Conflict and Negotiations. All right, let's get started. Our learning outcomes for this chapter. After studying this chapter, you should be able to describe the nature of conflict, including the conflict escalation process and how conflict can be de-escalated. Honestly, if you can take nothing from this course, aside from getting better at avoiding escalating conflicts and getting better at de-escalating them, you have gained something very, very valuable. Discuss the 5 interpersonal conflict management strategies. Describe some effective conflict resolution behaviors and how to create constructive conflict. Delineate the difference between distributive and integrative negotiation, and identify 3 types of alternative dispute resolution. All right, 10.1, the nature of conflict. Conflict, a disagreement through which 2 or more parties perceive a threat to their interests, needs, or concerns. Okay, I think this is a useful definition. Some definitions are more useful than others. I think sometimes we don't always realize when we're in conflict with someone that one of their needs or interests or concerns is being threatened. They feel like it's being threatened, right? So having that awareness that when people are having a conflict, there's probably some core need, some important need that they're both, and that could be emotional. It could just be to feel good about oneself or to feel loved, or, there's a lot of different things. It doesn't have to be like money is at stake or something like that. There's internal things as well. All right, dysfunctional conflict is destructive conflict focused on emotions and differences between the 2 parties. Constructive conflict is adaptive, also positive conflict, also called a functional conflict, balances the interests of both parties to maximize mutual gains and the attainment of mutual goals, contains elements of creativity and adaptation, can lead to identification of new alternatives and ideas. Famous marriage psychologist John Gottman, he talks a lot about conflict and the importance of having more positive interactions than negative ones, and even within a conflict, still having positive interactions within that conflict. All right, different sources of conflicts in firms, organizations, differing task goals, differing process goals, differing interpersonal differences, resource constraints, change. Change is always scary and can often lead to conflict, right? Because uncertainty of change, basically that means anxiety, often creates conflicts and changes the relative importance of different organizational groups, right? So anytime there's change, there's anxiety. Anytime there's anxiety or fight or flight responses are activated, we're more likely to engage in conflict with others. We're less likely to be rational, to be thinking clearly. Differing values can be a source of conflict, poor communication, task interdependence when you depend on someone else, and then the very structure of certain organizations, of an organization, can lead to conflict over resource or conflict over attention or bonuses or whatever it might be. Maybe the structure isn't clear and 2 groups are supposed to kind of have jurisdiction over the same tasks. That can lead to conflict. Okay, another sort of delineation typology of conflicts. Conflicts can be come from task, process, relationship, conflict of interest, or values conflict. So just a slightly different grouping or organizing or way of thinking about different types of conflict. Informational conflict, another. Conflict occurs when people lack necessary information or misinformed. Structural conflict results from structural processes or features of the organization. Vertical conflict occurs across different hierarchical levels of the organization. So sometimes they don't have it listed here, but horizontal conflict would be conflict between 2 employees at the same kind of level. You might have 2 middle managers, 2 upper managers. Vertical conflict would be middle manager and a lower level employee, or a middle manager and the person above them. All right, conflict escalation begins when one party uses aggressive tactics against the other. In Eastern religion, spirituality, they do this. That's meaning the soft overcomes the hard. The hard is the fist, right? This leads to more force, right? So usually the way to overcome force is through softness. Now, some people have being too soft all the time and letting people push them around. So no piece of advice is applicable to every situation, but de-escalation requires meeting aggression and force with empathy and concern and questions, and rather than one person snaps and says something angry and then the other person says something and the other person, right? Okay. Glassel's 9-stage model of conflict escalation. So this is a useful sort of categorization of what we were just talking about. Hardening. So at this point, there are objective issues are at stake. You're arguing about some issue or having a disagreement about some issue, how to best approach an issue. At this point, the behaviors are discussion. What's the trigger to the next move? Well, argumentation tactics, right? Now, some people have a natural tendency to argue. That would be me, but a lot of guys do that, and plenty of girls as well. What that does is that sort of kicks things up, and that now things now become a debate. Okay, now it's objective issues, but also superiority and inferiority. Who's right, who's wrong? Verbal confrontation, argumentation, emotional pressure, debates. Now it's action without consultation. Okay, what does that do? That moves things into the action realm. Actions over words. Now we've got objective issues, self-image, this stuff up here. Now someone's trying to prove mastery. What does that look like? One side gets frustrated and takes action without consulting the other person, the opponent, blocking the opponent's goals, forcing the opponent to yield, decreased verbal and increased nonverbal communication. Now the next thing that escalates that is covert attacks aimed directly at the opponent's identity. Okay, which leads to images and coalitions, right? So in this stage, main conflict issue is that it shifts the focus from issues to personalizing the conflict. Accompanying that would be a win-lose mentality, people trying to save their own reputation. Now they're building coalitions, they're trying to bring other people to your side. You know, this is relevant in an organization. If the disagreement escalates, eventually you're trying to get your coworkers, other managers, upper level managers on your side. There could be attacking the opponent's identity, personal attacks, insults, exploitation of gaps in social norms, right? So kind of like not going past the social norm, but just sort of like going right up to it, or maybe inhabiting that gray area between like what's clearly not okay and what is okay. When one person loses face, feels embarrassed, that leads to the loss of face stage. Main conflict issues, fundamental values, restoring dignity, exposing opponent, distress of opponent. Here you're attacking opponent's public face to try and restore one's own prestige. Strategic threats and ultimatums. Now you've got threat as a strategy, trying to control the opponent, which behaviors at this stage would be extending conflict, presenting threats and ultimatums that restrict future alternatives. The next stage is actually acting on a threat or an ultimatum. So here you just say, if you do this, I'm quitting, or whatever. If you do this, I'm going to cut all the funding to your department if you don't get in line. Okay, then one person actually does that. Okay, limited attempts to overthrow, hurting opponent more than self, survival. These become some of the main issues. Behaviors would be attempts to overthrow the opponent in limited ways. Opponent not seen as a person. Trigger to the next move, effort to shatter opponent by attacking core. I mean, the language we can sort of abstract away from. Every conflict may not follow this exact thing to the letter, but we get a sense of how things can escalate, a general sense. This stage is fragmentation of the enemy. find some of these titles a little funny. Winning is no longer possible. Now it's about survival and outlasting the opponent. Here you've got behaviors or acts that are intended to shatter opponent or annihilate opponent. Now the thing that moves it to the next level is there was some focus on self-preservation, but now there is no longer that. Now it's total war. And we move to the last stage, together into the abyss. Annihilation at any cost, including personal destruction. Unlimited war with limitless violence, except own destruction if opponent is also destroyed. So this is a very useful kind of framework, if not perfect to every situation. It really does capture a lot of what happens between romantic partners, between friends that have a falling out, between countries that have a disagreement and then a war, between people within organizations. So it is really useful to have a sense of this and to have a sense of how to not escalate things and how to de-escalate. Okay. So what do we do to de-escalate conflict? Well, we can react equivalently to the other person. Don't overreact. So that's the most important thing, is don't escalate it. Don't do the next thing. But underreaction can de-escalate the conflict. We can set personal behavior limits at the start. Say like, look, I'm not going to raise my voice, and you can just leave the room and say, I'm going to communicate in a calm manner. I'm not going to raise my voice, or whatever limit you set. Managers can model de-escalation, set enforced limits on escalating behavior. So obviously a manager, their job is going to be one of their important part of their job is to manage conflict between people on their team or people in the organization at a level below them. So they're going to have to model de-escalation behaviors. They're going to have to be the one to step in. In a personal relationship, you may not have anyone to step in to be like, hey, you guys are raising your voice at each other. I need you to stop doing this. I need you to take a break. Let's come back to this when we're more clear-headed. Might be useful if people had that, but that's going to be the manager's job to help de-escalate things. Some things to do: be an empathetic listener. Things to avoid: communicating hostility verbally or through body language. Focus your attention on the other person. That's an important thing. In a conflict, we tend to focus on our own emotions without really being aware of what the other person is thinking or feeling. Using delay tactics can be helpful to diffuse emotions, give people a chance to calm down. Controlling your own body language, reminding both parties that a win-win solution can be found. Although that could come across as condescending if you're not doing this other stuff, being a good listener and focusing on the other person, staying focused on issues, not emotions. True if by not emotions, they mean your own emotions, but if by emotions, they mean focusing on the other person's emotions, then this would be false. So don't focus on your own emotions, focus on the other person's emotions and the issues. Avoid communicating, we did that one. Reject all requests from the start, challenging or threatening or daring, raising your voice. Obviously other things that go along with that: stomping around, getting up, slamming a door, blaming either party or saying anything that would cause the other party to lose face, become embarrassed, minimizing the situation or conflict. A lot of times we do the opposite, right? Of all this, in a conflict, we specifically go out of our way to insult the person, right? Rather than trying to help them avoid feeling insulted, we actually do the bad thing that we're trying to avoid. People tend to not be great at conflict. This is something that we have to learn over time. It's unfortunate that our education system isn't great and doesn't teach people these skills, because these take time. So yeah, takes time to learn these things. We're not born with all these skills. All right, interpersonal conflict management strategies. Some strategies are to collaborate, right? So what's a management strategy that can help avoid or resolve conflict? Well, collaboration, compromising, competing, accommodating, and avoiding, right? So these are all different approaches to a conflict. Obviously, competing and avoiding going to make things worse. Accommodating, collaborating, compromising going to make things better. Here's a handy dandy little chart. Here we've got low concern for others in this corner, high concern for others up here. high concern for others, low concern. Here we've got pursuit of self-interest. So when people are low in concern for others and high in self-interest, they're going to compete. When they're low in self-interest and low concern for others, they're going to avoid. If they're low in self-interest and high in concern for others, they're going to accommodate. And if they're high in both, they're going to collaborate. So this is probably the quadrant we want to be in. Sometimes this can be useful, but too much of this is not necessarily helpful. And sometimes it can be useful to avoid a thing, at least for a time. But if we're spending too much time in either of these two quadrants, that's probably a problem. Of the four, this one's the best. Compromising is sort of being able to do all four as needed. Okay, conflict process. Let's see what we have here. Let's zoom in a little bit. Okay, so conflict process includes several elements that define the direction, magnitude of the conflict. Disagreements, emotions, and escalation all play important roles and suggest optimal conflict management strategies. So let's look over here. Potential conflict is triggered by one or more causes, leads to a disagreement / perceived conflict. Emotion is not felt or emotion is felt. So two possibilities, this kind of directions this can go. If there's not emotion, the conflict doesn't escalate. If there is emotion, conflict escalates. And then what we have to do is use conflict management strategies. Those can either be destructive and continue to escalate, or they can be resolved constructively. Pretty basic. What are some conflict management skills? Listening actively, questioning, communicating non-verbally, of course, positive communication. You're sitting there scowling and punching your palm or something. That's not good non-verbal communication, but showing concern and open body posture. If your arms are closed, that's not a good way to manage it. But if you have an open body posture, slightly leaning forward, your hands are not clenched together, you have a concerned or pleasant or look on your face, not an angry one. Then there's mediating. Mediation is a person who can sort of go between the two people in conflict. Skills include open-mindedness, staying non-judgmental and calm, demonstrating empathy and sensitivity, remaining neutral, respecting confidentiality, showing flexibility, and resiliency. Best and worst conflict resolution behaviors for career advancement. Just like print these out and put them up somewhere and read them a bunch of times so you memorize them. They're that useful. Perspective taking. So best conflict resolution behaviors, perspective taking, focusing on interests rather than positions, creating solutions, expressing emotions, reaching out, documenting, meaning documenting areas of agreement and disagreement, to ensure understanding. So that would come in the reflective listening. So it's like, okay, I hear you say that you really want to get this project done and that you're concerned with this and this and this. And so it can mean putting things in writing, but it can also just mean verbally. Smoothing, playing down the differences between the sides while emphasizing common interests. Asking the parties involved in conflict to identify 3 or 4 specific actions they would like the other party to take. Really useful, applicable, super practical. If someone's mad at you, you can say, what's 1 thing or 2 things or 3 or 4 things you would like me to do right now to fix this situation? Things to avoid. Don't avoid the conflict. Don't try to win at all costs. Don't display anger. Don't demean the other party. Don't retaliate. And don't meet with people in the conflict separately. Okay, so a little bit now we're moving away from conflict resolution, escalation, de-escalation stuff into negotiation. So negotiation, sort of related to conflict management, but also its own topic. A process in which 2 or more parties make offers, counter-offers, and concessions in order to reach an agreement. Okay, a distributive negotiation is when any gain to one party is offset by an equivalent loss to the party, right? So this is, you've got $100, you're trying to decide how to divide them. If one person gets 90, the other person's only going to get 10. A win-win negotiation is one in which one person's gain isn't necessarily the other person's loss, right? So ideally, we have an integrative negotiation. We try and find a win-win solution. Effective negotiation, we evaluate all sides, consider their goals, avoid seeing the situation as an either-or proposition, make sure each side knows the other's interests and perception of the issues, identify what you can and cannot part with, right? You have to know what is kind of your limit of what you can give up in a situation, what's essential, what's not essential. Identify and use sources of leverage. Show the other side that you understand their position. Suppress your emotions. Emotion regulation is crucial to all aspects of success in life. Know your BATNA. It's your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So, simplest example here is like you're looking for jobs. Well, if job A offers you $60,000, but you're trying to get a more pay at another job, well, you say, look, I want, I'm not taking this job unless it's more than 60,000, because you might not want to give them that specific number in a negotiation, but what your best, if you can't come to an agreement with this person, you know what your best alternative is. It's very clear it's 60,000. And then knowing when to walk away. Okay, what is a BATNA? Okay, I think we talked a little bit about it. BATNA stands for Best Alternative to a Negotiated Agreement. It's what you could have done had no negotiation take place, or what you will do if you cannot reach an agreement with the other party. If you don't know your BATNA, you don't know how important a particular issue is. You don't know where you stand. You don't know what a good offer is versus a bad offer from their side. You don't know what's something you should accept versus something you shouldn't accept. All right, coming towards the end here, cultural issues and negotiations. Different national cultures have different preferred negotiation styles. Being treated disrespectfully because of differing cultural norms can jeopardize negotiation. Intercultural negotiation requires preparation and paying attention to issues beyond what is being negotiated, the appropriateness of different negotiation tactics, the emphasis to put on developing relationships, how to respond to deadlines, and where the negotiation should be held. Alternative dispute resolution. Okay, so if people can't come to an agreement in a negotiation between themselves, the two parties can't come together and come to a solution, then there's some options, and these are called alternative dispute resolutions. It involves a third party. Two people can't work it out, bring a third party in, and basically there's a few variations on that. Conciliation, third party builds positive relationships between the parties and directs them towards a satisfactory settlement. Mediation, an impartial third party, the mediator facilitates a discussion using persuasion and logic, suggesting alternatives and establishing each side's priority. These other two are sort of when things break down to the point where mediation or conciliation can't fix it. So this is a third party who has the authority to impose a settlement on the parties. That's essentially like going to a judge, and the judge decides who gets the custody or who should pay who how much. Although in an organizational setting, it might be the manager arbitrates between two employees, or the CEO arbitrates between two managers, etc. And an ombudsman is sort of related to this, although slightly different. Someone who investigates complaints and mediates fair settlements between aggrieved parties. Okay. All right. That is our lesson on conflict and negotiation. All right. I will talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.